get a driver's license, you had to go through all kinds of process, a written test, and then an actual physical test just to get a driver's license. And then later on, sir, if you wanted to get married, you had to get a marriage license to be married. And if you wanted to practice in certain areas, whether you be an accountant or a doctor, all different types of things, you had to get a license and show some type of training. Sir, part of this problem is, why I say this is a symptom, is that being a parent requires no training at all. There is no course I learned. Where do we learn to be a parent? How do we do that? We model those parents who raised us, our grandparents, parents around us, parents in our village, parents in our community. That's what we do. There is no formal training to be a parent. And hence, as I said, when you have to be dealing with the provisions of this bill, you already have a problem. Sir, Article 3 of this bill, the third paragraph, speaks to the purpose of this. And I must say that prior to reading this bill, I had not read the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And because I read this bill, it caused me to go and read this because it was referenced in there. And it references, when I read it, there are 4 points that I want to bring out. The first point I want to bring out on this United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, point 41, tells us in here that if the laws of a country protect children's rights better than this convention, then those laws should be used. So, sir, this is a minimum standard. This is a minimum standard. But we could do more if we wanted to do more. That was great to know. This is not something that we only follow. 3 other points. Point 24, sir, of the convention says children have the right to the best health care possible. The best health care possible, sir. Point 28, every child has the right to an education. Primary education should be free. Point 29, sir, children's education should help them fully develop their personalities, talents, and abilities. When I read those 3 together, what I clearly understand is that we, in saying that this is the purpose of this bill in item 3, and adopting this convention, we all agree that our children should have the best available health care and the best education that they could get. And it is on those 2 points that I would like just to expand, sir. I question, having understood that, what our priorities have been as a country over successive governments for many years. Let me start with healthcare, sir. I worry greatly, and all the stories that we hear them, some in here, some in the media, some on television, some at parties we go to, we hear of difficulties in getting health care at the hospitals, in the polyclinics, wherever it might be. Now remember, sir, I'm tying this to, we say that the purpose, we adopt this fully. And therefore, by extension, we are making the commitment that we are going to give our children the best health care that they can get. And I worry that that is not so. I worry when I see the amount of private charity money that has to go into our healthcare system to keep it running. I worry that we forget how much, the tens of millions that is per year, whether from the Sandy Lane Charitable Foundation, from Maria Holder Foundation, if I don't have that name right, charities like the COVID-19 one, Rotary, Lions Club, many, too many to name, but individual charities that put tens of millions of dollars every year into our healthcare system, often from outside of Barbados, more often than outside of Barbados, just being friends of Barbados. That worries me a bit because I question then, is really healthcare a priority for us? So when I think of a priority, Mr. President, I think of relationships. When someone in a relationship says, you don't make me a priority, what does that mean, you know? You don't think of them first, you don't give them your best time, you don't give them your best effort, all of those things. And I worry, frankly, when I look at our healthcare system from a government point of view, can we really get up and say that it gets our attention first. It gets the first money that we have. It gets the best equipment that we can afford. It has the best facilities it can afford. And every child in Barbados can get the best health care. Because what I see today is that quite often, sir, there's two levels of health care in Barbados. There is one where you rely on the public health care, and there's another health care system where if you have insurance or other means, you can get better health care. And sir, the Barbados I aspire to is that we should all have as a right, as we have signed on to here in this Convention on the Rights of the Child, as it states in Article 24 of it, children have the right to the best health care possible. That's what we should be doing. And it should not be that we have two systems going. I'm a capitalist at the end of the day. I've said that, so I'm not embarrassed to say that. So I understand that people build businesses and some will do well and some won't. I understand that. And some will be able to afford some things and some won't. I understand that. But if healthcare is our priority, at a minimum level, sir, the best healthcare should be affordable to all. And I would like to see that back as a top priority for us. The second part that worries me about priorities, sir, as I've said, is the education. And I've spoken on this before, and again, I don't want to take up too much time. But it's almost 50 years ago, not quite, but fairly close to 50 years ago, that I went into that great institution, Harrison College, and I got an excellent education, sir. And what I'm going to say today is probably going to annoy some of my friends, so I'll be in trouble this evening, sir. But at the time, my recollection of the 11 plus, back then, I think it was 1976, my recollection was that the parents would all take a look at where their children were possibly going to get to, and they would choose the best one or two or three public schools that they thought they might get the marks for. We all aspired to go to a public school. That's where the best secondary education was available. Whether it was in my days, it was not gender together. So Queen's College was girls and Harrison College was boys and so on. So as a boy, you would want to go to AC, you wanted to go to Commere, you wanted to go to Foundation, you wanted to go to Lodge. Those were the things. My worry, and at that time, sir, there were very few private secondary schools. You had the secondary school like MAPS College, which was run by the Catholic group. You had the Ursuline Convent, again by the Catholics. You had, later on, you had MAPS College came out. But really and truly, and this is the part that'll get me in trouble, those schools were not where you aspired to go to. You aspired to go to the public school. If you got the good enough mark, you went to the top school. If you didn't get the mark where you thought you were going to go, hopefully you got a bursary, and then you slipped into a private secondary school. Today, sir, my concern is that's completely reversed. The first choice is not to go into the public school system, because it's a difficult place to go. If you're not the top child and you can teach yourself, you will possibly not get a good education there. And so what I want to do is I want to tie the two of these together without speaking for too long, because remember, we're talking about the rights of our children. We're talking about this particular bill in front of us. How I want to tie these two together, sir, is that when we choose priorities, and healthcare for our children and education for our children must be amongst our top priorities, if not number 1 and 2. And I'll tell you why also a little bit further on. If it's going to be your top priority, I would think that the people who work in those areas, education, sir, and healthcare, would be our smartest people who are paid the most, who work in the best conditions that they can work in. And I am fearful today, sir, that that is not true. That in our school system, it is not the best facilities. Our school teachers, sir, are not paid the highest salaries. Our doctors, our nurses, our healthcare worker providers are not working in the best conditions. And all I'm asking, sir, is that, again, I am not criticizing this bill. I am talking about a systemic issue over multiple generations, it seems. I went back 50 years to compare, sir. I didn't go back 5 or 10 or 20. I've seen a deterioration in it. And what I would think is that if healthcare and education are our priority, as they should be, because it wasn't that long ago that we talked in here, sir, about the challenge that we have with the National Insurance Scheme, where we have a declining workforce, we have an aging population. So in fact, what we need is we need highly educated children coming out of our school system today who can be high income earners, because there are less of them to pay for us, sir, in our old age, which is not far away. I'm very, very sorry to tell you, Mr. President, but we're not far from it. So we need, if you have less and less, we need them to be highly educated. It is silly for us not to invest our first available dollar in the education of our children.
Mr. President, I raise on a point of order.
Point of order.
Mr. President, I hate to interrupt my good friend, the Honourable Senator, but I think that the records will show that every successive government since independence, every successive government, save none, the two largest calls on government expenditure have been education and healthcare, without exception. So it is misleading to attempt to say that those have not been government priorities. And I say this as a Barbados Labour Party administration with the acknowledgement that every single administration since independence, and I let it go a couple of times, but I wanted to raise in a point of order because it is misleading to the public.
Please proceed, Senator Mandelou.
Thank you, Mr. President. And if, in fact, my words were to mislead, I apologize. Would not have been my intention. However, perhaps I will like to see it even more priorities. And I will provide some solutions for that, sir. So, as I said, this bill, I support it fully. I hope that as we progress, I think I read some very encouraging words recently. I saw that the government has acquired the former Ursuline convent, and that at that time an announcement was made that they'll be partnering with a Ivy League school. I've since seen that the government has signed a memorandum of understanding with Columbia Teaching College, I believe it was. So all of these things are positive things. So I would agree with Senator Cummins that there has been lots of positive things done. However, I go back to my material point, which is to say, sir, I have no objection to this bill, and I like the fact that we acknowledge in this bill that the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child are acknowledged, and I do hope that we will focus on these, as we have done, and will continue to do so, so that our children can have the best education and can look after the President and I in our old age. With those words, I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Mandelou, and thank you for looking up for me was, in our old age. Thank you very kindly. Senator Reverend Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, fellow senators. Sir, I rise to support this legislation, but before I do so, there are certain matters that I wish to correct before I go too far. And one has to do with, I see she has left her seat, Senator Watson, on her, that she spoke more of education than she spoke on this bill. And in her chastisement of the CXC. As I speak to you, sir, I am the chief examiner with the CXC for advanced level history. So I know the various workings and how this goes. The point that I'm trying to make, sir, is that rather than chastising a government for not rescheduling an exam, the common entrance exam, we must first remember that the CXC is a regional body. And therefore, you are marking certain papers, marking them all over the region. I know that there were attempts to have the examination rescheduled. But that, sir, would mean prioritizing the common entrance exam, pushing back CSEC, pushing back CAPE, and then we have a problem with our students entering university on time. That has been the problem. The second thing, that while she chastised the government for many things, what she did not say about this legislation, sorry, the Honorable Senator.
Thank you.
That while the senator chastised the government, what the senator did not say was that the legislation also prevents governments and anybody from chasing children out of school at age 14, and also for charging fees that our children cannot pay for university. Those were glaring omissions from her speech, sir, because it was largely based on education. So I just want to make those minor corrections. I want us to look at this bill that is before us. And I want, first of all, to speak from an historical background. Because you see that this bill and the Child Justice Bill replace legislation that was far outdated. In one case, 1904, in another case, 1917. And if we have legislation that is being passed in 1904, it means that it was conceptualized maybe in the 1800s. And even if we use 1900 as a base, that would have been 62 years since the abolition of the slave system. And even then, that system, even if it was a democracy that worked for the few and not for the many. I'm saying to you, sir, that the crafters of this legislation, even though it appeared to protect children, it didn't. It didn't. The crafters of this legislation, sir, were not like you and like me. We were not their interest. The children of this country were not their main interest. That is why some of them could commit a crime against children and only pay $24 and get off and go away scot-free, because that's what I call it. No, sir, I'm not racist. I believe in the dignity of humanity. I believe persons, white, blue, black, pink, all have a right to live and have the right to existence. I have a right to freedom and liberty, and especially of views. But I know that there are times when we begin to speak that we, and especially go down certain trends, we are labeled as racist. Children under previous legislation, sir, suffered tremendously. Education was not open to them. As a matter of fact, most of the legislation that was passed was centered around how do we keep children as on the plantation? How can we extend the plantation or the elements of the plantation during freedom? And what turned out to be a protector was really, sir, harnessing a slave system that had long gone. And then, sir, this is about the third time that I have stood in this Parliament, in this Senate, and I see legislation, modern legislation coming. You see, you can see that government is about legislative reform. It's about modernizing the legislation. And I think that we cannot operate in 2024 on legislation based on 1904 and 1917. So, creating and transforming Barbadians, preparing a Barbadian society for the now and the future is paramount. When I examined this legislation, sir, and I looked at the detractors, I read the comments on this bill. Opposition built on issues that are not contained in the bill. It says it was denying rights. I see the opposite, that the rights of children are protected. There are some who are arguing that parents have a right to raise their children as they see fit. And I agree with that. I agree with that argument, as long as what parents see fit jive with the law. That is my contention. And what we know, we all know, sir, that some children are scared of their parents, afraid of saying what exactly is happening. And this legislation allows children to do that. So we talk about denying the rights of children, children choosing their own gender. I do not see it. I did not see any of this in the previous legislation. The funny thing, sir, is that there are persons maybe who are weak by name and weak by nature marching up and down this place, creating havoc. And I've said, sir, that it seems to me, I'm not saying the fact, but I'm saying it seems to me, that there is an attempt to make this country ungovernable. Some of the persons who are marching, sir, there is a child protection bill in Jamaica. Remember that. Go and see what is the difference between that and the bill that we are proposing here. I have not heard anybody protesting against the one in Jamaica. There is a child protection bill in St. Lucia, modeled after the OECS. I have not heard any St. Lucian protesting the bill in St. Lucia. But we're here marching up and down like the Grand Old Duke of York, reaping havoc on this society on Saturdays. It is a necessity there. This bill is a necessity because a nation has the right, and not the right, the responsibility to protect its most vulnerable. And in this case, we're talking about the very young. We're talking about children. Why is this necessary? Because in our society, parents are outsourcing their children. In fact, it seems as though that many parents are not taking responsibility for their children, but they are outsourcing them to various agencies for protection. We talk about maternity leave and paternity leave so that parents can bond with their children, but the parents are outsourcing their children. They're outsourced to their nurseries. They're outsourced to kindergarten. And this is all a result of the market, the consumer market. They're outsourced to the new things they have in the schools, the little infant schools, I can't remember what they call them. They're outsourced to the schools where the principals have become the surrogate grandparents and the teachers have become the surrogate parents. And any time that we see children being outsourced, government has a right to bring legislation to protect these children. Why do we need this legislation, sir? Because of the level of child abuse in our country. Sir, I heard the minister last week in presenting the bill. I heard him say that we should speak of our own experiences. And I intend to speak on my own experiences today. At the age of 23, I was asked to sit on the board of the child care board. And at the first meeting I went to, sir, it was a horror experience for me. Because when the child care officer presented her report, first instance, a child, a boy, of course, given trouble in the house, or assumed to be given trouble in the house, or was blamed for giving trouble in the house. The mother told him to keep quiet. The boy kept moving up and down. And she was at the stove cooking. And she took up that boy and put his hand in the saucepan with boiling water. That was the case that was reported. There's another case, sir. Another case. Where there's, the truth is, I can't remember if it's 2 years or 2 months, but I'm sure the minister remembers it very well. But this 2 months, I think it's 2 months. Baby, vomiting ceaselessly. And when they did a search on the baby's body, there was traces of male semen on the baby's stomach. That baby couldn't talk. Recently, sir, a girl about 15 years old, her father died. And I'm going to be as dramatic as it is because I'm truthful, and these are things that are happening in this country. That is why we need this bill. The father died and left a handsome insurance policy for her. The mother was involved in another relationship. Used the money to buy a van. And then the man in the house looked at the girl and said she looked good. No, Mr. President, no girl can't look good for me. School children can't look good for me. They may be beautiful, but they can't look good. He is now looking at her and she looks good. And what does the mother do? Take a razor blade or whatever it was and mark the girl's breast and then her face because she was not to look good for that man. On leaving CBC, sir, this is the most horrid. One Friday morning, a message was there at the front desk for me. And I took it. And the lady said, call me. I called the number. She asked if I could visit her now. And I did. She said, I'm about to show you something, but I don't want you to feel that I'm disrespecting you. She said, sir, I have not had sex since the age of 7. Since the age of 7, she began to show me all the scars of the destruction that was done to her body. She said, don't call my name, but I want to talk about what we're going through in this country. That is why we need this bill, sir. Because there are a lot of families staying at home and they are waiting for the stranger to appear. The stranger to appear who will abuse the persons in the house. The stranger never comes. Never comes. Because the stranger, the abuser, is in the house. I speak in, sir, with a certain degree of passion. Because what I'm seeing and having experience as a teacher, students could come and speak to me in confidence about the things that happened to me, happened to them. And they could not say a word. Because whenever it happens, they are advised, you can't say this, because this is who is supporting this house. So we have abuse at home and in the schools as well. There are children who are sexually molested by teachers in the schools. That too must stop with this legislation because it now has to be reported. It can no longer be kept silent. There's a form of a parental abuse too, sir, that is happening. I have a daughter in Canada who's a teacher. And she called me and she said that a black student called her a nigger. I asked her, what did you say? She said, I ignored him. I said, but all you had to do was to congratulate him on recognizing that you're a nigger, because a nigger knows the characteristics of another nigger, so therefore she could call me a nigger. She was intelligent. But she said the reason why she didn't say anything, because that boy was a family of 3 boys. 3 boys. The first was about 14 and the other 2 were twins. And because the mother did not have a girl, she took one of those boys and tried to turn him into a girl. And life is very uncomfortable for him in the school. The older brother doesn't want to associate with him. Children are laughing at him. And one day, she found him with this long thing like a nail, injuring himself. That boy is suicidal. When we have this kind of parental abuse, sir, it damages our children for life. There is abuse by religious predators in this country as well. I'm sure Senator Cameron Rogers would agree with me. We all know, sir, again, I was on the child care board. And this case came to the child care board, where a pastor made the girl open her mouth. It's in the records. When he finished, he told her to swallow it. She is now being filled with the Holy Spirit, Senator Rogers. She is now being filled with the Holy Spirit. And then he gave her that sweet, we had a paradise plum, and told her that this is paradise. This will take her to paradise. You all know about that case because it went to court. I was in Jamaica when it was tried. These are the kinds of things that are happening to our children. But another kind of religious abuse is also frightening our children with the gospel, right? Look, so let me give you a story of myself. I went to school and I did something wrong. A nice boy, but I did something wrong. And then the principal decided that every 4th and 5th formers must go to ISCF. Well, they went to ISCF. And I remember that evening I had a preacher. And he preached, and then he said, "Your children, imagine on Judgment Day when the Lord comes and he takes out his projector and he puts it on the reel and he begins to play back all the sins that you have committed. What are you going to do?" Well, I made it in my mind that I didn't want my grandmother to see that projector, so I went and got saved at SAF. I say that so to say this, that we are even using the gospel to create psychological problems on our children. because they're always told that they're living in sin and this thing will happen and the next thing will happen. The late John Caldwell will tell you about the case that we left the child care board and went to attend to. When the boy's grandfather died, and he loved his grandfather, and he wanted so much to be with his grandfather. And the pastors or whoever were there telling him, you hold on, your grandfather going to a nice place, he going to heaven, and they get this glorious picture of where the boy went, of where the grandfather went. But the boy said, I want to go there with my grandfather. They told him, but you know, you have to die first to go with the glory of grandfather. And one evening, the boy ran across a truck. Good luck for him, he didn't die. This is the kind of religious parenting that we are doing on our children. And it should stop. Sir, we must protect our children. When you look at the tables for abuse every year, look at here, 36 in 1 month or something like that. Figures, sir, these are child care board figures, not mine. Abuse of our children. And we need to protect them. We need to ensure that when our children leave home and come to school, that they are protected. You know, there are some persons that I know have gone miles to protect children. And I'm going to call her name. And her name is Mrs. Denise Nurse. I'm sure you would know. I know that Senator Nurse is a very patient man. I know from my days with her, he had to be a patient man. The many times she got up 11 o'clock at night, Senator, to go to look out, she's leaving her children at home to go to look after other children. And I'm sure that because of her, there's one person who reached certain heights in this country. And I've never heard Mrs. Nurse's name called. She saved that girl, saved her, so that she could realize her own potential. I'm saying to you, sir, that we need to protect all our children, the most vulnerable in society. The time will come when we'll be able to speak on those, on the elderly. But as it stands now, our children need that protection. And the one thing that I like in this legislation is the fact of mandatory reporting. Mandatory reporting. If we do not protect our children, tell me, who will? I'm much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Reverend Morris. Senator Reverend Canon, Dr. John Rogers.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It is indeed an honor to be recognized to say a few words on this piece of legislation before us, and I thank you. I wish to also thank those who were responsible for giving me the opportunity to sit on the Joint Select Committee that perused this bill and interfaced with the public. A commission that was ably chaired by the Honorable Tony Moore, and with the expertise, I must mention, of Ms. Sean Bell from the CPC office, who was stellar in guiding us through some of the intricacies of the bill. I also wish to thank those members of the public who made submissions to the Joint Select Committee and who appeared before the committee to represent their perspectives. Granted, as has been said on several occasions before during the course of this debate here and in the other place, some of the submissions did not really apply to the bill before us. But I wish to encourage those who have this deep care and concern for children, to continue doing so and continue to advocate for the rights of children in our country. I also wish to thank and recognize Mrs. Faith Marshall Harris, who was instrumental in putting this bill together, and I would have had the opportunity to sit with her, the privilege really, to sit with her on the Committee for Monitoring the Rights of the Child several years ago. And so I want to encourage her to continue the work she has been doing in pushing the UN Convention for the Rights of Children and the Human Rights Convention. I find it quite apropos that we are reflecting on this bill during Child Month. And the Child Month that is being reflected on under the theme, Children, Building Hope and Resilience for Tomorrow. It was the African-American orator and writer and abolitionist Frederick Douglass who said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And I've highlighted that quote to make the point that this piece of legislation may well be amongst the most important that we have had the privilege to reflect upon during our time in this chamber. And I say that without fear of contradiction because our future is really our children. And it really speaks to the future of the nation. When one gleans the pages of history, just as a cursory look, you'll recognize that whenever persons are targeting a civilization or targeting a nation or anything, the children are the first points of entry. They're always the first points. It's there in the Bible as well. In the book of Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy is written at a time, sometime around the 8th century, when the little nation of Judah, that was a conservative little nation, all of a sudden finds itself as a part of on the global stage. And Assyria is coming in and they're imposing their culture and everything. And what does Deuteronomy tell us? Constantly throughout that book, teach it to your children and your children's children. Make sure that you instill these things in children because they're going to be the first points of influence. The same thing is true there in St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 21, when Jesus goes into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday and everybody is in euphoria. It's the little children who are running through the temple singing, "Hosanna to the Son of David." And the chief priests are telling them, stop. Because they realize if this takes root, we're in trouble. It's always the children, you see? And so, as I said, I will not knock those who made submissions and who are very passionate about their concerns for children because it's very real, it's very challenging. I would not even knock parents in the 21st century because many of us are struggling to keep up with our children. The technology is moving so quickly that by the time we get used to WhatsApp, they go on to something else. And that's just the nature of parenting in today's world. So it's very challenging, and we can understand why some parents will be frustrated. But long before John F. Kennedy opined that children are the world's most valuable resource, and indeed, they're the best hope for the future, Jesus was telling us this. It was Jesus who said, unless you become like one of these little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And what was he really saying? He was extolling the purity and the innocence of children. And just to use modern day analogy, our little children come into this world like little tablets, little devices, empty, and the world downloads its material on them. And so it is very important that as parents and guardians, we pay close attention to what is being downloaded. But it's even more important that we pay attention to what we upload. Because in many instances, we are uploading things that are not beneficial to our children. And why? Because it's natural. Every generation tends to lower the moral bar because we always feel that our parents were a little too strict. So we will ease a little bit on our children. And I think I've mentioned it before, that Chinese proverb that said, the morals and values of a society are like a tree under which every generation comes and finds shade. But what happens if every generation comes and cuts off a branch thinking that they're pruning it? At some point in time, some generation will come and there'll be no tree. And so we have to recognize that this is the world in which we're living. And these are the challenges that people are facing. So we have to be careful what we upload on these little tablets that God has given to us. It's for that reason, I believe, that Jesus went on to say in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 18, verse 5 and 6, if anyone should cause one of these little ones to stumble, it is better that a millstone be hung around his neck and he be tossed into the depths of the sea. That's a serious thing, sir. Granted, we can expand it and recognize that he may well have been speaking about religious leaders, as Senator Morris pointed out, because he's really saying to us, you've been given the responsibility of caring for these people. And if you cause any one of them to fail or falter, they are your children. I know that there are some denominations that do not refer to their religious leaders as father, because there's a passage that says, call no one father. But there's also a passage in 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 15 where St. Paul said, you have many teachers, but you do not have many fathers. I became your father in the gospel. And that's really where it comes from. It's a role that we play in nurturing the children the people that have been placed in our care. I perceive that this bill, sir, along with the child justice bill that we will debate not many days hence, are two sides of the same coin. Because the atrocities that the child protection bill seeks to avoid may in many cases be the causative factors that the child justice bill seeks to address. So they're really two sides. And with this in mind, sir, permit me to speak a little on this bill under the theme, Answering the Silent Cry. Answering the Silent Cry. That was the theme of a rally held by the Anglican Youth Diocese in 2009. And it was held at an interesting time. It was held on the 28th of December. The 20th of December, in the middle of the Christmas season, we're answering the silent cry, and it dealt with the abuses that are meted out to children and young people in our society. Why are we reflecting upon it at that time? Because right within the Christmas season, there's this date, December 28th, that is observed as Holy Innocents' Day. And it serves to remind us that in all the euphoria of the Christmas season, there are some people in our world, particularly young people and children, for whom Good Friday, Christmas could come on Wednesday or whenever. It means absolutely nothing, because the abuse is the same no matter what day it is. And so, answering the silent cry within the context of this bill speaks to what is happening to children in our nation at this time. And I dare say that that silent cry is very loud in our community for those who wish to listen. On average, as we've heard, there are about 600 reported cases per year of child abuse. Reported. I read a study from Child Protect Children's Advocacy Center in Alabama, which suggested that for every incident of child abuse reported and child neglect reported, there are 2 others that are not. So if we're over 600, taking that into context, we're dealing with 1,800. That's about 60% of the children who sat common entrance this year, sir. 1,800. That may well be what we're dealing with. The silent cry may be louder than we can possibly imagine or even want to imagine. I remember some years ago, I always have to quote a little calypso, sir. Terencia Coward, TC, sang a song called Broken Dolls. There are a lot of broken dolls in our society. The virtues of this legislation have been touted in both chambers and already, so we need not regurgitate them, other than to say that I want to specifically point out that I support the purpose of this bill, set out in Section 3 and grounding it in the UN Convention on the Rights of Children, because the UN has been at the forefront advocating for the protection of children. And sometimes in this part of the world, we may not be au fait with some of the challenges that others are experiencing. But there are countries in this world where children, babies, undergo what they call IGM, infant genital mutilation, as part of culture, abused. And what the United Nations is saying, we cannot do this anymore to children. We're scarring them for life, as in the case that Senator Morris pointed out earlier. Section 5 also deals with what is a child in need of care and protection. And that section spells out very clearly that this bill is not necessarily will not necessarily touch many children in our society. But it is important that it touches the ones that it needs to touch. The ones who have no one to stand for them, the ones who are victims of abuse, the ones who are there and every night cannot get a night's sleep properly because they're listening for those footsteps coming to the room. Those who have lost self-worth, those who have lost their dignity at the hands of an adult. The Section 24 has been one of the sections that came up in the deliberations, and there were some submissions, not written, but that questioned whether we should go with this mandatory reporting fully for some professions. Sir, I'm a priest, and I know that within our traditions there are seals of confession and so on. But I always believe when it comes to children, there can be no seal. If we know that something is going wrong with a child, we are obligated, we ought to feel obligated to report that so that that child can live out his or her life in the best way possible in their father's world. We cannot conceal abuse. And the same thing is true for us as teachers. I had the opportunity to teach in the government setting for a few years, and I always say, teachers are the angels in this society. After he left. Teachers are really angels in this society. I'm speaking generally here. But teachers become parents. They become everything for these children. And sometimes they're the only person to whom the child can turn. The only person to whom the child can talk. And if teachers in this country really had to talk, like if money could talk, we would be shocked by what they divulge. This bill, therefore, the mandatory reporting, some may see as a two-edged sword. Because sometimes when children speak to adults, it's not that they want it reported. They just want it known. They just want to tell somebody. But now you are mandated to report it. And that is one of the areas that we're going to have to navigate. And what it can mean is that because of mandatory reporting, every case will have to report it, children will be taken care of. What it can also mean is because it has to report it, children will not talk. So we have to look at how that will be balanced out in our community. I'm going to conclude shortly, sir, because I know we have little time. Just on Sunday, just to give this a face, at my church there was a little program called This Is My Story, This Is My Song, and this is where people tell a story and tell a religious song that would have had an impact on their lives and relate to their story. And one young lady gave a testimony of her life of abuse, starting from when she was 8 years old. And it was by a family friend. Her mother had left her there, sleeping because she was working, and then she left her there. And then sometime during the night, the child felt someone touching her breast. And she jumped up, scared, crying. Her mother was called. She explained to her mother what was happening. The perpetrator said he was just pulling the sheet over her. The little child said she thought that her mother would be coming for her. The mother said, "I'll come in the morning." And her thing was, I lost my voice from that day. I had nobody to talk to. I could tell no one anything. And that is what a lot of young children are experiencing in our society. And that's why this bill is so seminal and so important. And only in meeting with the Child Care Board, when they came to one of their sessions, they related some of the challenges they have when going to homes and so on. Some of them were actually apprehensive about having to go to homes. Because the question was, should the police accompany them now? And they said some of the things we see, you don't want to go there alone. Relate a story where they went to a house and a child was nailed to the wall. These are the things that are happening in Barbados. So I want to implore those out there, I know your passion for children and so on. The legislation will not be perfect. We can't make perfect legislation. There's no such thing. But at least let us do something to protect those who are vulnerable in our society. There will come a time to discuss all the LGBT things that we want to discuss. And I encourage them to research as much as possible, because that time will come. But this is not the bill for that. This is a bill where all of us who are right-thinking Barbadians must rally. This is not about politics. As you know, sir, I have very little care for politics. My thing is that we as the people of Barbados must do all that is necessary to protect the vulnerable in our society because, sir, as Frederick Douglass says, it is easier to raise strong children than to repair broken men. If we create broken people in our society, it's going to come back, and I'll tell you where it come back when we talk about the Child Justice Bill. With those few words, I wish to thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers. Senator John King.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to pick up from where Senator Rogers left off. You know, Barbadians have a way of burying their heads in the sand and pretending that certain things don't happen. We've heard from various members of the Senate some of the most gruesome stories of what takes place on a daily basis in this country. I have intimate knowledge of these things, having worked at government industrial schools for many years. And I also have, I wouldn't call it a unique perspective, but I have a perspective that will probably mark me as probably one of the worst people in Barbados when they say what I have to say. But I also live my life by one very simple thing. The truth will set you free. And the truth is the truth. A lot of the problems that we face, I've heard a lot of mitigating statements, and poverty, and all sorts of different things that we said these are the reasons. But if you look at the society within which we live, the majority of people in it come out of poverty. In fact, I dare say the majority of them are still poor. But that does not mean that because you are in poverty or you experience these things, that automatically you get a pass for bad parenting. And I know a lot of people would like to pretend that this is a mitigating factor. I'm not in that. And I will never be in it. Because I've seen too many things over the years that point to some people who, and let me put it as simple as this analogy so you understand. Get children, but really don't care about them 2 minutes on a watch. And I hope you understand what I'm saying. They don't. But they get the children. And you know what it leads to? Something which I call welfare fraud. Because one thing goes into the other. They have no intention, none, of providing for these children. So you see somebody, 5, 6, all come through my hands. Government industrial school. No mitigation factors, nothing you do. And then you look further down the road and you realize, well, okay, but there's a grandfather somewhere, same problems. You see, it's a vicious cycle. Vicious cycle all the time. Now, in some of these cases, yes, I understand. But I'm also clear in my mind that there is something called the power of choice that we as individuals have. And I always say to people, look, we're not perfect, none of us. We will all make mistakes. And as was mentioned by Senator Manilow, there's no parenting manual. Like it or not, we all learn from our parents. We learn what to do and what not to do. Because from your own experience, you will devise what it is you want your children to experience by you being the parent. But in too many cases, Mr. President, we have situations where men still playing village rams, 4 and 5, all across the country, don't look at none, have no relationship with them at all. Just get them and drop them. And then where do they end up? 99.9% of the time they end up in state. State can't look after them. And I'm saying to you that the time has come where we as men must own up to these things. When you fall short, you can't be able to say, look, this is on me now. What is it that I'm going to do? What actions am I going to take to ensure that my children have at least some sort of relationship with me? It might not be the best in the world, but what is it that I'm going to pass on to these children, that they don't make the same mistakes that I would have made, or that my father would have made, or that my grandfather could have made, to break that vicious cycle. because it is a cycle. But we cannot keep coming into Senate or the other chamber and making out everybody to be victims. Especially when we start talking about ourselves as black people. You can't be the victim all the time. There's a word called responsibility. Where does it begin and where does it end? You decide to get children. You make that decision. You do what you have to do to get them. You think you get them. You're responsible for them. And you can talk what? Any government, I don't care which one it is. BLP, DLP, Breadfruit Party, don't care. It is the responsibility first protector is parent. First nurturer, parent. And if we don't fix the parenting problem, future generations are going to be coming into this Senate to discuss expansion of this bill in order to deal with the new problems that are going to arise, because for every generation there are new problems, things that you've never seen before. And when I look through this particular bill, one of the things that really stood out to me was the whole idea of the cyber crimes. Where now many parents are happy to jump this here in the children's hand and let this raise them. And I can talk in pure Beijing because you can't see, you know what I'm saying. They are happy to put this in their children's hand and leave them to look at whatever it is they want to look at, speak to whoever they want to speak to, not knowing who on the other end in a Zoom meeting or on a telephone. You're opening up your child to all kinds of problems and all kinds of people. Or, as was mentioned earlier, women encouraging their children to take money from people. Let me don't play games. Because this is too serious for us to make mock sport at it. It's too serious. I could tell you stories that will grow your head, but I won't. But I tell you one. A young social worker sitting down with a mother who was by profession a prostitute. Older than me. I was probably about 19, 20, 21, somewhere around there. Yeah, 27. And she said to me in the discussion that the men like to like her daughter more than she. You understand what I'm telling you? This is years ago. So this is nothing that now start. And we hear all these stories about young daughters who have to suffer abuse by people who put in money in the house. This is now start. This is going on all the time. But this society likes to pretend that nothing is happening, because we reach the stage where everything happening to me, it ain't happening. But as was mentioned by Senator Rogers, broken people become broken adults. And broken adults don't get fixed soul. They're broken for life, scarred. So when you do these things to children, I think, what are we saying? And I would wish that some people out there in the public domain, sometimes before they open their mouths, think, what am I saying? How is this going to affect the wider society? Not your little interests or your little political games. Well, this man here don't got time to play games. It's too serious. So that when you take things and twist them, and you know that that is not what we're discussing, as was mentioned by Senator Rogers, but you're trying to make a political point by twisting things and turning them. But you fully well know that it is not that. It might be fun and games for you, but serious people can get hurt or misled on issues that are really being taken because the situation demands that you take them. You know, the reality is this: no government makes laws unless there's a problem. You don't just come up with a law every 5 minutes and say, okay, here comes a set of legislation. There has to be something that is the catalyst for you to have to respond. And that is why we are here with this legislation, because the country out of ethics and out of morals. It isn't about church, and it's about simple common decency. Understanding this is my neighbor. This is a child. This is an old African proverb. It takes a village to raise a child. I experienced that as a youngster coming to Barbados. I experienced it. Where did that end? Rather, when did it end? When did we change? When you reach the point where nobody looks out for anybody anymore. So government got to step in. A government has to step in to fill a gap where a community would have been the first place to do that. Even listening to the comments about places and institutions where children should feel safe and not being safe. That's a serious indictment on us as a people. I mean, some months ago, probably a couple of years ago, maybe, there was a thing on social media going around with young men coming off a cruise, and a child can't be no more than about 10 or 11, with a bottle of brandy holding it so, and big people skinning them out and laughing and carrying on. Or a Kadooment morning, a woman, godchild, holding by hands and walking up on a big woman. Huh? And everybody skinning them out. Like this is a joke, like this is a joke. Well, it is a joke because we become a joke society. You can't be serious. It cannot be serious. And if we don't put a stop, it gets worse. Young men that should be productive members of the society. Every time you look around, boom, boom, one day. You think that that is because of just poverty? No. It's a lack of parenting. A lot of things have changed. I agree. We don't have the extended family like before, where if a father was not present, you had a lot of uncles and aunties and other things that would be around to help. Those days are done. The nuclear family, as we know it, even that changed. So there's a problem. And we are reaping the whirlwind of that now. That is why we got to deal with all of these things. Now, it is important that every single member of the Barbadian public, not just the public officers, and like Senator Rogers, I'd like to thank all of them for the work that they put in to getting this legislation here. Members of the Child Care Board, you know, all the people that contribute to it, I really salute them all. But as was mentioned earlier, this is Child Month. And I remember many years ago also working with Mrs. Nurse on creating, at that time, a jingle called Lift the Children Up for Child Month. So I'm intimately involved and seriously passionate about this. Because I have seen firsthand where delinquency on the part of parents destroyed many children who had so much potential. A lot of potential. And you always say to people, in life it is not where you start. So some people like to use this victim mentality. You start out poor, you ain't had nothing, you got start clothes and whatever. It is not where you start. No journey in the world ends where you start. Because if it ends where you start, it means you never make a step from there at all. You start in the same place, or you went around in a circle. It doesn't work like that. And we have got to come to a place where politics, as it is, has its place and it's time for everything. But on issues like this, if this country cannot come together and rally on it, all of us are going to pay the price. Mr. President, I just turned 60 years old. You didn't genuinely believe I would get there. Come on, Johnny, my boy. 60 years old. There are younger people who are coming behind us, who when every single one of us in here reach the stage where we can't do for ourselves, you're going to be depending on them to create a society in which you can live till God calls you home. This is not a joke. This is not anything to play with. So I implore, I beg and I implore those people who, as was mentioned earlier, march week after weeks after weeks after weeks to cease and desist with some of the things that you're saying. Speak truth. When you speak truth, nobody can question it or nobody can do anything else but admit it is the truth. But when we begin to start to twist and turn things for whatever gains we believe that we will get from it, you stand the risk of hurting a wider set of people more so than the few that you may target. I will say no more where that is concerned. A word to the wise. This bill, though not perfect, say it all the time, none of us in here are perfect. If you want a perfect bill, the only place I can send you is to the Lord. Your man ain't gonna get it for you, don't care how you try. But he will do his best to protect the people in this country. And I gotta keep hitting on this point all the time when I hear people on the outside talking. Senator Boyce, he lives here. He works here. He has friends here. Not only in Christchurch itself, all across the island. You understand? All over the island. Right? Not only in Christchurch itself. You can't just run up and down Christchurch itself. You run right across. Right? But, you understand? But I say this. You look around this table, there's not a person here or in the other house, the other chamber, who is not vested in ensuring that the wider society benefits from the skills, the various things that we bring to the table. How could any of us sit down and agree to things that are supposedly done to hurt the society? It does not make sense. We live here. Sometimes I wonder what people are thinking. Now, if you don't agree with something, that's fine. If you find something that can be improved upon, that too is fine. But when you set out to deceive, you know, I really have a real problem with that. And I don't care if you're writing for the newspaper or online or whatever. You're creating an atmosphere of fear all the time, distrust. And you can't, and as was mentioned earlier, it will become unmanageable. And who suffers in the long run? The same children. They always do. When adults make bad decisions, children suffer. And we've got to think clearly as to what we're doing. So I just really wanted to make those points. And again, I give kudos to all of the persons who worked tirelessly to bring this legislation here. And with those very few words, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator John King. Senator Blackman.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to start by commending this bill and to also publicly commend my colleague who sits in the other house, the minister with responsibility for this bill, and to thank him and his team, and also to make mention of a prominent Barbadian, a proud Barbadian, and one who sits on the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, Faith Marshall Harris, who continues and has been a champion on the global stage on the issue of the rights of the child. And therefore, both Minister Humphrey and Faith Marshall Harris deserve due commendation as Barbadians who continue to be on the forefront on this critical issue at this time of our development. And Mr. President, as I start in what will be a relatively short presentation this afternoon, we live in a world where, sadly, and you've heard various honorable members treat to the issue, that these bills and these legislations and these treaties, as it were, don't just come out of the blue. They're there, sadly, as a result of issues that face children around the world. And therefore, as our Parliament debates this bill, we have to ask ourselves, where have we gone wrong in many of these instances? And how do we correct it? And this is one instance in the further correction of where we've gone as a society, where we've done wrong, and I say we in the collective, in issues affecting our most vulnerable, our children. And Mr. President, as society grows, whether you're from the global north or global south, it doesn't matter. Every single country wrapped up in the aspirations of development, wrapped up in the aspirations of growth, wrapped up in the aspirations of prosperity, our young people, our children in particular, want to be a part of that development. But there are things that continue, sadly, and you've heard the examples today. You've heard the examples in the other chamber. There are things that sadly happen in our society that thwart that aspiration and that ability for our young people to do what young people and children do, be children. It's as simple as that. There are things, sadly, that stop them from being able to be a child and then have to contend with other things because some amongst us in our society unfortunately see it fit to do things that goes against the very values of what we aspire to be as a country and do so against our children. And it's within that context, of course, that we find ourselves here. And we have to ensure that as Barbados grows as a society, that as Barbados grows to be a productive nation, as we all want as Barbadians, irrespective of the political divide, that the very foundation of that society, our children, is protected and given the armor of that protection, so that as we grow, that foundation is secure. A few of us here, I understand, are engineers, and you would understand. You cannot build a proper house or structure or building without a strong foundation. And if we do not protect our young children, our society will crumble. And this bill is coming at a time, as I said, despite the fact that those who ought to know better see it fit, for whatever reason, whether psychological, whether spiritual, or maybe a combination of both, do things that goes against the very nature of what God would expect us to do relative to our children. And I say that because, Mr. President, no child should have to endure verbal abuse. And I want to start there. Oftentimes we've seen in our society, in Barbados and in the wider Caribbean, parents, family members, neighbors, persons within institutions where our children have to go, often speaking to our children in ways that is reflective of a post-colonial society. As I've said in this chamber, since I've returned to Barbados, next year is 400 years that the British will return here. And unfortunately, part of the legacy of slavery is that there is a lot of manifestations in how we treat to our people and our children in the same manner in which our foreparents had to endure. And verbal abuse cannot be part and parcel of a modern, just and ethical Barbados. And how we speak to children must be in one of love, in one of respect. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't correct our children, because as the good book says, spare the rod, spoil the child. But spare the rod, spoil the child does not mean take up a broom and hit the children. No. The rod of correction, you correct in love. You have two goodly gentlemen from the cloth in here. I'm sure you can confirm that. You do it in love. You correct in love. Like any good mother or father, if you do foolishness at home, I've done that when I was a youngster. The parents said, "Chad, don't do that." But they did it in love. There was no verbal abuse. And in a modern Barbados that aspires to be the most just society in the world, we cannot allow our people to verbally abuse our children. That is one. Number two, there can be no room for physical abuse. Now, I'm not one to cry easily. But as Senator Morris spoke, Mr. President, I kid you not. I kid you not. Hearing these stories that he relayed to not us only in here, but to the wider country, of the abuses physically to our children, immediately struck a chord with me, because why I have an 11-year-old daughter. This is not just some abstract academic debate. We are talking about real children here. And children are in a way so vulnerable that they don't have any other recourse. Who else will they go to? Who can they complain to outside, of course, their parents or a teacher or a family member? But if those systems around them that are meant to protect them are being destroyed, Mr. President, just place our minds, if only we can, in their shoes. How can those young people feel? We are all adults in here. And we have the option to protect ourselves if someone does anything against us. But a young child, whether a baby or a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, doesn't have the same recourse and ability that we do. And therefore the law must protect them where there is that breach. And therefore, a modern Barbados cannot have physical abuse of any kind to our children. But it's not only the verbal abuse or the physical abuse, it's the psychological and emotional abuse. How many times, Mr. President, have you heard in families or in neighborhoods, go along, you're just like your father. Go along, you're just like your mother. Well, that is true too, in Basin Palat. But you're right. You're absolutely right. Now, if somebody tell you like your father because he was the greatest batsman on the team, no problem. If somebody tell you that you're just like your mother because she was an excellent singer or a great accountant or whatever, no problem. But if it is used in circumstances where it is pulling down the very fabric of that young person, a child, the emotional and psychological scars are oftentimes irreparable. And as Senator King rightly spoke, and I think Senator Rogers, that is why part and parcel we see oftentimes the manifestation of anger and frustration coming out of our people as they get older. Because why? You remember, a child at that stage of their human development, that is when they absorb. It's a sponge. And if you create an environment where they can thrive and believe that they are of significant value, they'll grow up with that confidence and belief, I'm of significant value. If they're put in an environment where they believe I'm of no value, they will grow up believing I'm of no value. And therefore, physical abuse, as I mentioned, verbal abuse can have no place in a modern Barbados. But the psychological and emotional has no place in our society. And I want to take this opportunity to say to parents, to families, to aunties, uncles, godparents, teachers, camp counselors, whoever has responsibility to engage with our children, never must you use your tongue to denigrate our children. Yes, you must correct them where necessary, but you must do so in love. Because why? If we don't, we create a society that is going to be chaotic, and then we wonder how it gets. So no, the foundation has to be secure. And I'm so proud to be a part, not just of a party that is bringing this bill, but as you listen to the contributions of members from all sides, part of a chamber that supports such a piece of legislation as this, because this is who we are as Barbadians, protecting our vulnerable. But I want to go a bit further, Mr. President. When you look at the need for bridging the gap, I felt it necessary to use this occasion, as we're talking about children and in Child Month, about bridging that divide between our children, not just young people, but our children and our elderly. In the Asian society, knowledge transfer is part and parcel of how the economic structure is actually configured between the young and the old. Because why? Persons who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s would have gone through different phases of life and gathered immense experience. And what they do on a voluntary basis, and there's a national structure with civil society and families, etc., is that young children go to the homes or wherever they reside and engage with the elderly. And then engage in knowledge transfer, because the elderly share, in simple terms of course, with those children on the experiences that they would have had in life. And those young people, one, maintain the culture of the society. Two, they understand how things work And 3, those values from the older generations are passed down. And the science has shown that for the elderly, they actually live a bit longer because they're engaging with youth. So this is something I think that we could explore in Barbados as a country, where there's that bridge between our young children, of course, once they're at the age of, they can speak and understand, and our elderly. This is what we must do as a country. And when you look at where we need to go, as I said, we must let children be children. But Mr. President, I could not rise before also treating to a number of issues that have surrounded this debate on this bill, even before it came in here today, even before it was laid in the other place, but through the consultations, etc., and public discourse. And I want to really treat very briefly to the issue of what I call the elitism and hypocrisy surrounding how we treat our disadvantaged in our society. We have inherited a system of governance, of society, that was handed down to us by our colonial past. And it often reflects a lot of inequalities that bear no place in a modern progressive Barbados. And I'm proud to be part of an administration, the Barbados Labour Party, that sees it fit to ensure that the vulnerable amongst us are protected and that they're given the due space to enjoy prosperity and to remove obstacles of inequality where they exist. And when you place that in context, one such example, talking about children and young people, is the whole exercise of educational reform. And when you look at educational reform, part of it, not all of it, but part of it is the whole issue that at 11 years old, you have to go through what we know as the common entrance. And our government has made it clear that part of that reform must ensure that the different talents that our people have must be able to contend and to go in the right direction so that they become 1, prosperous citizens, productive citizens, and 3, we don't have just a percentage of our people doing well and then banding off the rest, the other 60%, as it were. And I find it very shocking, and I want to say this, and I've listened to it over the last 6 weeks in different forums, TV, radio, social media. And I want to ask the Democratic Labour Party to publicly apologize to Barbadians, to publicly apologize to Al Barrow himself, even though he is gone, because they invoke his name but bear no resemblance to his ethos. How can they perpetuate the idea of maintaining a system that was introduced by the British elite themselves, and the British themselves saw it fit after a while, realizing that it caused deep societal problems to move away from that system because of the inequalities that it caused in Britain in the 60s in particular. But because many of them are beneficiaries of this system, they want to protect it with their dear life. And I want to say to them, Democratic Labour Party, you owe Barbados an apology. So whether it be the leader of the opposition, whether it be the leader of the opposition in the Senate, the Democratic Labour Party, I'm asking you to apologize to the people because you're not helping us to break down the inequalities in this society. An apology is needed.
Senator Watson, now what they raise?
Just on a point of clarification.
Yes.
I just want to clarify for Senator Blackman that the leader of opposition business in the Senate has never intimated that the 11 plus should be retained. I just want to make that clear, and I'm hoping that he does not put out there, put abroad, that that is a position that has been taken by the leader of opposition business in the Senate. He can go on with his request for an apology, but he's not to attribute that statement to me.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Senator Watson.
Mr. President,
Please press on, Senator
Mr. President,
Blackman.
sir, I have never seen such a disassociation of a leader of government business in a Senate from the leader of opposition in the other place. I have never seen it in my life. But apparently it happens over there. And I understand there is a culture of divide currently going on in that place. I understand. I understand. Mr. President, sir, so I take it, as the honourable member indicated, that the honourable member has not done what I said. No problem. But clearly, I am calling again for the leader of the opposition, of the Democratic Labour Party, to apologize on behalf of his party for advancing such an inequality on the backs of Barbadians. It is wrong. And I'm proud to be part of this team, whether you want to call it a whip or not. We are whipping in the right direction for our people. Yeah. But we can get the educational part, it's true. But they are part of a party I'm not going to get, because Mr. President, I promise you I will be relatively short today. But I understand the context of disassociating. We see recently the issues going on. But the other issue I have on this is that when you look at where we are, that hypocrisy manifested today in this debate. As I sat and I listened to, and I must admit, I enjoy hearing the contributions of Senator Watson. I do. I don't agree with most of what she says, Mr. President, but I enjoy listening. But today I was deeply shocked when I heard, and any first-year student of history would be as well, when I heard a broad categorization that abuse falls squarely. My interpretation of what was said by the honourable member, let me state, Mr. President, but falls squarely within a certain social class amongst this country. It is wrong to believe that only poor people are being abused.
Senator Blackman, I don't remember that assertion being made. You said it's your interpretation, but it's just a strong interpretation that I wouldn't allow you to have it, even if it's your interpretation. I think it mischaracterizes the context. So even if the words were not said, I don't think you should advance that as your interpretation of what was said in the debate.
Mr. President, sir, I've always yielded to your wisdom. And on such an occasion now, given the interest of time, I will do so as well. But thank you very much for that. But broadly speaking, on the other hand, I'm part of an administration that continues to ensure that every chance we get, we ensure that we bring down the inequalities of our country. And that is why we are elected. That is why we are appointed to do the people's business. And on the other hand, we talk about inequalities, we talk about family and children. Let's cast our minds very briefly, Mr. President, on the fact that the DLP, when they were in office, created a ministry focusing on family, and they did absolutely nothing with it. They abandoned it. Now, on the Labour Party, we have the One Family, which of course is an amalgamation focused on family. We've hired over 400 workers to help the elderly. We've just hired more than 50 social workers to work with families. Psychological support for children as well. Hired young males to act as behavioral support at the Child Care Board. Also allocated resources to build residential treatment center for children. And the ministry with responsibility for these matters now have the largest budget it has ever had to tackle the issues. Now, am I saying it is all the resources needed? No. But the government has taken a decision that in order to treat to these issues of inequality and protect the vulnerable amongst us, that we have to ensure that the resources are there. And therefore, we must continue. But in closing, Mr. President, sir, I simply want to say that this bill brings us of age, not only in terms of the UN Committee of the Rights of the Child. This bill is not necessarily a reaction to that. This is a bill that focuses on ensuring how do we protect our people, how do we protect our foundation, how do we protect our vulnerable, how do we protect the weak amongst us. And we must not only rely on the bill, and I really want to echo that point because Senator King alluded to it, and rightfully so. There will be the law. But we must so re-engineer our society to go in the right direction that even outside of the law, that instinctively we protect our children, we love them, we give them guidance, we protect them, we show them the ropes of prosperity through hard work, decency, honesty, and the ability also to speak freely. And I can't sit before making the fact that our society is one where we often like to tell our children, stop talking, put your hands by your lips. I enjoyed that at primary school. What are you talking? You talk too much. Yes, I admit, I used to talk a lot. Yeah. But when you get age 13, 14, 15, Mr. President, and you go into school sports and throw a microphone in front of your mouth, they expect you to be the greatest orator. Having told you at age 3, 4, 5, and 6, stop talking. How? It can't work. So I'm not saying to let children run wild, but you have to create an environment where you can mold them and let them be expressive and give them the guidance as to the how. And with those words, I simply want to once again commend the Ministry of Responsibility for this bill and the team and the stakeholders and the committees who got us here today. Because I'm proud to be part of a Barbados that sees it fit to ensure that our vulnerable and our children are protected. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Honorable Chad Black. Senator Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am happy to be able to stand and contribute to this debate. And let me say up front that I support this bill. I support these bills. I think that I would want to congratulate the relevant ministry for having finally come to the stage of producing a modern child protection bill. As we would have heard, some speakers mentioned that the existing bill goes back to the early 1900s in some cases. And it can be no doubt, therefore, that it would have gone past its shelf life and really be in need of revision. So there's so many things that have changed that made it necessary. And so we have now reached this stage. Of course, most of the other, a lot of the other CARICOM countries have already have bills in place. So we are really a bit behind, but nevertheless, we are just about, I think, there at this time. And I would also want to say up front how much I congratulate the agency which has been over the years working in this area of looking after and making sure that our our children are protected. And it's not only the social workers who work on the various cases, but, you know, the aunties, the house parents who have to give up their family time to be able to be a family and a parent for those unfortunate children. And I have to say that I have, on occasion, been pressed into service, as it were, in terms of doing my little bit. Either whether it was to take someone to a case or, when there's a call in the middle of the night, the police finds a child wandering or something, and somebody had to get out of their bed and go out and deal with that case. And they are really hardworking people. I don't think that they get the praise they deserve. Too often we have too many armchair social workers who don't really understand the key technical issues about social work. And they get on the various talk show programs and suddenly they become experts, but not understanding all of the technical issues and so on. And so from time to time, those officers and the board have been maligned, unfortunately. But I think there are lots of good things about this bill. And I would also like to congratulate the committee, the committee that worked on it. If the 800 plus pages, I believe, about 800 pages, I believe it is any indication of the level of work and the volume of consultation and listening to the presentations of various members of the public and explaining to them what the bill, what the legislation was trying to achieve. If that is any if all of that is any indication, I think that good will definitely come out of this bill. One of the really good things I want to see, and I think it was Senator Rogers or one of the other senators who spoke before mentioned, is this whole issue of if you see something, say something. And we cannot, anything that we need to put in place to ensure that we protect our children, who are the vulnerable ones the most vulnerable ones in our society, is really welcome. And I understand that, you've had situations where from time to time, something has happened in a school, and the school doesn't want to report it to the authorities because you don't want to bring the school into disrepute. But that cannot be overall in the interest of looking after the welfare of our children. And so I think that is one of the really good things which should come out of this bill. Something else I would like to suggest also, and I've seen from time to time in the press where there's a charge brought against an alleged perpetrator. And the parent sometimes come forward and says they don't want the child to give evidence in the case. And, they give several reasons. They don't want them to have to go through the whole, they don't want them to go through the trauma of the abuse which they had suffered in the past. But sometimes it's also a case where it is believed there's some negotiation which has gone on between a parent and the perpetrator, and the case is they're encouraged to drop the case, and that is not helpful. It is not useful to seeing these cases of abuse eliminated from our society, because what it does is that it allows the perpetrators to go free and unpunished for these kinds of situations. And so I would like to see in a similar way where it is now mandatory that we're saying if you see something, you say something, perhaps it should now be mandatory that the parent should not be the one alone deciding if that child should be permitted to give evidence. Perhaps it is time that a panel comprising of the director or the child care board or whoever else, but a group of people who make that decision and make sure that where we have issues such as sexual abuse and so on, that those who have committed the abuse are punished. And I don't know how that would work, but I certainly would like to see, because we all know that there are, if there are, and I believe the minister would have reported when he made his opening debate, when the actual, this debate started back in 2023, and he gave some indication of the level of abuse cases. I believe they were in excess of 600 in a number of years, and they were increasing, and they were going up. And we have to stamp them out. And so I think that anything which will work to make sure that people are not allowed to get away with abuse of our children, and as we go forward, I think then that would be a positive in terms of reducing the level of abuse cases. Because there are so many that, as much as have been reported, there are several more, and we all know that are never reported for a lot of the same reasons. So this part of the legislation, I think, is very useful, and I certainly wish to support that. I think, Mr. President, there are a few little issues which I would wish to just comment on. And one of these issues that came to my mind was an issue relating to the question of consent. Under our legislation, under our current legislation, a child can give consent to sexual activity at age 16. But yet it seems a little strange that if they wanted to there's a gray area between the age 16 and 18 that they can't marry. They have to they would have to have parental consent. And there is an international standard which puts the age of 18 as the age of consent. And I would like to think that perhaps, I'm just throwing out, that perhaps maybe we should consider moving the consent as it currently exists in Barbados from 16, the consent to sexual activity is from 16 to 18, and bring it in line with the international standards. I also wanted Mr. President to touch quickly on corporal punishment. I'm pleased to see that there's a reaffirmation that it will not be that it is not allowed in child care facilities. What I don't see, and perhaps what could be explained, is why it has still remained in terms of schools, which still allows, because it hasn't been taken off the statute, which will still allow head teachers, for example, and senior teachers to inflict corporal punishment. So what is the difference there? Perhaps it should all be eliminated. I personally am not a supporter of corporal punishment. I know that people of my vintage in coming up would have suffered, would have endured, I should say, some level of corporal punishment. And truly we say, you know, it didn't do me bad. I didn't come out as a bad individual. But truth be told, I don't think, and this is just my personal view, I don't think it is right. I remember, Mr. President, my two daughters, when they were much younger, I believe, probably still at primary school, and they were having some argument at home, and it got heated. And I decided I was going to inflict some level of punishment. I happened to be reading the daily newspaper, the Nation newspaper at the time, and I rolled it up. Now, it was a Tuesday Nation. Now, if you know, the Tuesday Nation is the most flimsy paper of the week. But I rolled it up, and I decided to inflict a few lashes on their behinds with this rolled up newspaper. To this day, they make fun at me for those newspaper lashes. But I say that because from a personal level, just to inflict that punishment, which I know would not really anything abusive, in my view, it hurt me. And obviously, it hurt me more than it hurt them, because I became I became the laughing stock. So the point is that there are several other ways of punishment. Some of them are a bit poo-poo. Sometimes when we hear about timeout and so on, a bit poo-poo. But I think that there are sufficient alternative methods of punishment that can be used. You know, if you take away a child's cell phone, for example, or the tablet with all the games, that is probably going to hurt them more than if you inflict some corporal punishment. And so I would like to see that eventually this whole issue of corporal punishment would also be eliminated from the schools, and that we will be looking to more sensible or humane, if you want to call it that, types of punishment for our children. I also wanted to just comment on the question of a family court, Mr. President. I believe the time is right for a family court. Given the level of cases of abuse which we know that are coming before the courts, And the problem is that they're not being necessarily dealt with because of the system, the court system, the backlogs and what have you. And they're not being dealt with with the level of urgency which is absolutely necessary. And I think that a court set aside to deal specifically with these child issues and other family issues would more slightly be a step in the right direction in ensuring that you have a more efficient system of dealing with such cases. I mean, I recently have read in the press where, you see a case or an abuse, I should say, which took place 4 or 5 years ago, but yet the perpetrator is now being, the case is now being tried. And sometimes it is obviously a difficult situation for that child who may have been under 13, under 11, and to call them 4 years later and ask them to recall the events of that particular situation, I think cannot be in their best interest. And of course, at the end of the day, the perpetrator will, nowadays you go in and you plead guilty and you get 1/3 off for, pleading guilty, and another set of, reductions for cooperating with the police and this and that, and then you end up that the individual spends very short periods as punishment, or maybe not anything at all. So I think we need to see that those cases are dealt with in a much more timely manner. And while I'm on this issue, Mr. President, I also want to mention another issue, which is a kind of a court-related as well, and issue relating to punishment. Very often, or from time to time, one recognizes that there have been issues of abuse, not with any sense of malice or any such thing, but because the parent did not know any better. They didn't have any better way of training or disciplining children. And I would like to see that agencies, NGOs, government working closely with NGOs such as the Parental, for example, and that the courts recognizing that rather than in every case where there's really a genuine situation because the parent just did not know any better, where there's that genuine situation, not necessarily to criminalize them, but offer them opportunities for retraining or for proper training to take on their parental duties. And I know I've seen on a couple of occasions when you read the court cases where the individual judges or magistrates, as the case may be, have actually referred the parties, the guilty parties, to Paradise for training. And I think that is a good thing, because as I said, we should not be trying to criminalize individuals where they are trying their best. And I raise this point because Senator Morris raised quite a few issues relating to abuse. And I don't want to go back over that obviously, but I just wanted, there's one particular one which I remember, which happened, I think it was last year, or maybe earlier this year, reported again in the press, where this parent, a father, there was this case where a neighbor, I think it was, I can't recall the exact facts of the case, but the neighbor had complained that his child had stolen something, whatever it was. And he lit the stove, turned it off, and then put her hand on the hot stove. And that was reported in the press. Now that is a strange one. I don't condone abuse. I really would advocate punishment and serious punishment for abuse. But that case was funny because when you heard that parent's side of the story, you recognize that he was just trying to do his best to raise that child to be honest and to be at best. But that he knew no better, that is all he knew. And he felt that that punishment would stay here forever thereafter. And this is why I think I raised the point, because I think that training in parenting is so important for, those type of issues, but also for the younger mothers, for example, who raising children in their teenage years, for example, and they really are people who need that kind of training. And so I want to emphasize that I think that is also very important. Finally, Mr. President, just let me raise the issue, and I don't know where we are. We've been hearing for a long time. This is not a direct, as it were, issue relating to child protection as such, but it has to do with the whole question of the amalgamation of the social services. And I raise it because I think that there are, in a lot of cases, various overlaps and inefficiencies in the various social services because they're acting as different entities and not necessarily communicating and so on at the level that is necessary. And so I would like to think that if this new body, which has been hinted at for quite a long time, can be up and running, a level of efficiency and economy in terms of services and so on can actually be achieved. We, of course, must ensure that government must, of course, ensure that when that the new department comes into force, that it is properly staffed with the requisite number of social workers, psychologists, and so on, that will be necessary to have that department functioning as it should. But I would also suggest that a legal department that there be some legal department within that department, because there are a number of legal issues which the social workers and others have to deal with. and work through. And they really need to have that level of legal advice and so on. And so I think that would be useful in making the department that much more efficient. And so I look forward to that legislation coming and we moving forward. I hope that this bill, when it becomes law, hopefully very shortly, will actually go a long way in mitigating against a lot of the abuse and a lot of the issues pertaining to children, which we have been experiencing over the years. And with that, few words, Mr. President, I am obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Kevin Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I join the discourse this afternoon, I would like to start by wishing Senator Andrew Boyce all the best. I was overhearing some asides about his activities in Christchurch South, and I hope that he succeeds in whatever the objective is. Now, sir, as usual, my contribution is one which would be limited somewhat to the actual bill which is before us in its current stage. And I think that in echoing some of the sentiments and perhaps in offering one or two unique contributions, we perhaps get a wider picture as we try to aim to bring full spectrum analysis to the topic under discussion. In doing so, sir, I must say I'm indebted to a close friend of mine who does not want to be mentioned, Mr. Kelly Gittins, and also must join the accolades being heaped on Faith Marshall Harris, who I'm aware of in terms of the constant contribution to children in the society, and who actually offered me and provided me one of my first jobs when I was at university. I also would be remiss if I did not mention the continued efforts of Justice Barbara Cook-Aline, who maintains a constant program in terms of children outreach services. The purpose of the legislation, sir, sets out that it seeks to protect, this is at section 3, sir, provide and promote in relation to children. And what is it that it seeks to protect, provide, and promote? When we look at section 3, it says the purpose of the act shall be to protect a child from abuse and neglect, to provide for a child in need of care and protection, and to promote the welfare of a child. And I think that the wide ambit must be commended because the contributions seem to focus on the abuse which we all don't even wish to hear about, and which is so tragic but exists in all societies. But there are also other ambits of this legislation which goes above and beyond. Sir, I've heard the legislation described as a quantum leap, as being 100% better than what was there previously. So the efforts made, and I must also then thank those members of the Senate who sat on the Joint Select Committee, as well as those in the other place, for their efforts in getting this legislation to where it is. Now, when we understand the purpose of the legislation, I was told that we must also be mindful when we looked at some of the factors which go into what is determining or determined to be the best interests of the child. In other words, sir, as part of fulfilling the purpose of the act, you have to ensure that the best interest of the child is given paramount consideration. And the best interest of the child is determined by a number of factors that are set out at section 2. Safety, capacity of parental care, physical, mental, emotional, or psychological needs, etc. But what I was told by the persons involved in the industry, such as Mr. Gittins, is that when we speak of the views of the child, which is, of course, sir, defined as someone under 18 years old, we must be cognizant that the ability of a child to express those views are somewhat stymied, and that perhaps in future iterations of this legislation, we widen it to say not just the views of the child, but the wishes and feelings of the child. And the reason for that statement with regard to wishes and feelings is that given the developmental limit as to where the child is, expressions such as wishes and feelings can assist in capturing and assisting in providing what is needed, sir, in terms of the expression. When we continue our journey into the legislation, sir, we see at section 5.1, there is reference to what we call the, and this is a somewhat ticklish subject, sir, the concept of a child being able to be charged in relation to a criminal act if they're over 12. Now, I understand the age in the UK is 10, which they have received numerous concern about, but that the average age in Europe is 14. I assume there was a rationale as to why this age was used, and I believe that this is something which the public would benefit from the education discourse in relation of the fact that we are saying over the age of 12, there is an element of criminal responsibility. Now, I'm sure you'll hear the narrative, well, some kids just bad and you ain't know and you're not in it. Well, fine. However, the concept of a child legally being criminally responsible is one which I believe will benefit from further public discourse and explanation as to the methodology going into the circumstances that those arise. We recognize, however, the necessity for such legislation in relation to the social and, of course, the juvenile justice system. However, the messaging, and I think I've heard it repeated time and time in here today, you can have the noblest of intentions. However, if there's an opportunity for misinformation or disinformation, or perhaps just conversation, it tends to be spun in a certain direction. You see how I put that together? So, sir, we continue on into the legislation, and I observed at section 7.4, there is a statement in relation to the child's participation, which is all well and good. So remember, this critique, sir, as always, comes from a position of seeking to get what is best through almost a mutual assistance, dialogue, dialectic exercise with regard to the Parliament of Barbados and how we sit in this place. And sir, when we say this, when I look at section 7.4, which states, a child shall be entitled to legal representation by an attorney at law in any proceedings, I think we should strengthen that. Now, we know the strength of the word shall, but it's almost like I would suggest, and I'm assuming there's a reason for it, that it should be a child must be represented at legal proceedings. Because shall be entitled almost invokes the concept that when you're entitled to something, you may actually have a choice not to use what is entitled. So perhaps clear legislative language, and we could talk about intent and they will say, well, go to the courts because we know that's the common rejoinder. But imagine such legislative language which says, any child who is dealing with this scenario will be provided, must be accompanied by an attorney at law, not just a parent or guardian. Not just a parent or guardian, because we all know that with the best of intentions, and as much as we like to decry those of us who serve in the legal field, when your back is against the wall, you hope someone like Senator Nichols coming for you. This also goes back to an experience I had when I was started practice just the other day, 2000, and there was a case involving the Child Care Board, and I can speak about it because it's public record, where I was brought in for some reason, I believe it was legal aid, on behalf of the child. And it was interesting, the exercise. And I would just say, coming out of the exercise, the system being what it is, or was, or perhaps shall be, will come to a stage where the persons who are involved, who are doing so much consistently, are somewhat burdened in their task. And in having a fresh perspective in the case of children who find themselves in these scenarios, it may lead to a more independent, robust outcome. So that's just my contribution in terms of that piece of the legislation, sir. Now, of course, with the establishment of the Child Protection Authority, this is going to be a statutory corporation, correct? Yes, we spoke about that, but we understand why, and another statutory corporation, but the government explains why the balance needs to be done and the resourcing and all that good stuff, so we'll put that to the side. The most important part, sir, is I would like this to be put within the sacred vault of the promises kept, promises made, promises kept category that the government has. You see, this is so important, sir. This is so important, sir, that this nascent body, if it is not properly funded, will not be able to achieve these lofty goals. So we will sit down here, we will give the rhetoric, we will tell all the horror stories that we hear, we will say all these things. So I am asking that it's put in the promises made, promises kept category, and it is executed and funded to allow the job to be done. And what's going to be necessary for this job to be done, sir? Firstly, as is set out in the legislation, adequate staffing, and we know we do have the educational resources of individuals in Barbados who are qualified to provide the assistance. I would, however, proffer, sir, that one of the benefits I got on a IVLP program to the United States was that the persons who serve in these roles should, and I don't know if we have the resources, so of course these are all just suggestions, should be offered a stringent mental assistance and review program. Because what they recognize in America is that the persons who have to deal with these cases of the children who are impacted have literally to be rotated out of the care system after a certain period before they start to be invariably impacted by what they see. So in the instance of judges in their juvenile court, they're rotated every 9 months. Now I know we don't have the resources, but certainly allow for the mental health coverage and the mental and psychiatric and psychological needs because of what they see. We sit down here and we tell these stories for whatever reason, but there is an impact, not only on the children, not only on the parents, but also on the caregivers that needs to be considered. Another area, sir, in terms of the funding, will, as always, be a request for education to explain what is being done. Now, I said education previously in terms of the rights of the child and the different areas, but also education in terms of we know what will happen when this bill is passed. We know the counter reaction, we know the statements that will be made on social media. So let's look at a section like section 24, which calls for mandatory reporting. Now, this list is what we will call exhaustive or non-exhaustive, because at the end of section 24, after they list all the persons who have to do the reporting, they say any other person, and this is at 24I, 1I, any other person who by virtue of the nature of their work owes a duty of care to a child. We could argue that 6 ways from Sunday, sir. So when you have legislation like this, which we understand the intent, which is, as Senator Rogers said, if you see something, say something, and the legislation is certainly encouraging or compelling that you do so, we need to make sure that persons understand. The section applies to parents, medical practitioners, administrator of a hospital, school principal, social worker, law enforcement officer, internet provider. any person who provides health care, welfare, education, religious, child care, law enforcement, and then any other person who by virtue of their work owes a duty of care to a child. That's a wide net. But we understand why it's being cast. But when you have persons who on social media will say you're casting a wide net so as to impose this on people, let us be ready with an educational campaign to push back on any disinformation or misinformation, as to why it is being done. Another reason, sir, is that it carries a penalty if there's not immediate reporting. Immediate reporting. No, sir, you have made and you have sacrificed, you, Mr. President, I'm calling you out in terms of your level of service to the government. Have you ever seen anything done immediately? Immediately in the civil service, sir, and in legislation, two different things. So we need to be cognizant that while we support the aims and the objectives of legislation, there are persons out there with various agendas who will seek to use it to cause issues. So be ready. That's all my suggestion is to the government. Now, sir, we speak also, and what I like is under section 27, for the persons who are obligated to do the reporting, that there is a level of protection in terms of the confidentiality which is given to the director. But this is Barbados, so how do we keep things confidential without the resources to allow for the information to be kept in such a manner? With regard to the necessary oaths of secrecy, with regard to the necessary training, with regard to the necessary computer systems and protection of the information that is kept. We got persons out there who are extremely malicious and dangerous, so how do we protect those who go and say, so-and-so did this? The legislation that we have passed already in terms of whistleblowers provides a useful guidance, and that type of guidance can assist in terms of seeking to protect, which is a key component, because if people believe that their disclosure or their reporting is subject to somebody else finding out, you are not going to get the level of participation that you want. So that is offered as a consideration for the powers that be, sir. Now, there is, of course, another reference to the immediate, and I'll repeat the concept of immediate in the subject. As a matter of fact, don't even let me limit it to the public service, sir. Immediate in the private sector, I'm yet to see it. I'm yet to see it. Senator Nichols will tell you a funny story, and the magistrate will tell you forthwith. Forthwith. But immediate, sir? Look at section 25. Where a report is made under section 24, the director shall immediately conduct an investigation. How? Without the resources. So we're putting these obligations on the policy implementers, the persons who actually have to do it, and we sit down here and say, well, this is what you have to do. This is legislation. Well, we have to give them the resources. How is the director supposed to conduct if there are 3 reports which come into one day, but you have 2 case officers conduct 3 immediate reports? So again, best of intentions, support is given, execution needs to be looked at. While we are supportive, these are considerations to have. Another piece I like though, sir, is section 50. And I think we need to expand this. The concept of maintenance of children who are held by the authority, by parents who can give, makes a lot of sense. It makes practical sense, it makes social sense, and it also helps with the coffers. And you know what? Let's not stop here with children. Let's deal with those persons who leave elderly parents and relatives at the hospital. And let's get some maintenance from them as well. If we can do it in this legislation, let's bring a Queen Elizabeth Hospital bill and deal with it at that as well, because there are too many cases in that scenario. So I like this piece of the legislation, sir. Now, sir, I note with interest that at section 52, there is the contemplation of the foster care and the regulations that need to be made. I would suggest, sir, that the same diligence which went into the production of this piece of legislation be echoed in terms of the regulations for the foster care, because at the end of the day, we need to look at the supervision of these facilities, the selection of the facilities and the persons. In other words, just like in the case of adoption and these other things, you have to have a certain amount of means, a certain type of character, police certificate, mental acumen, all this other good stuff to say that you're fostering our nation's children. So I would suggest, sir, that the need for supervision, selection, guidance, and mentoring of not only persons who fosters, but also the facilities need to be considered, because heaven forbid, and this is a pragmatic concern, we may find ourselves with certain persons who do not have the correct mindset, which then leads to us having the same problem that we are trying to mitigate against. Let me speak frankly, Mr. President. There are persons out there who would not necessarily seek to do what is right. And there have been documented cases of foster systems which have been utilized for abuse. So what mechanisms can be put in place to mitigate that risk and to protect against such abuse being done in Barbados? Now, sir, I am in support of the no corporal punishment as set out by Senator Chad Blackman. His net was a bit wider. I think he said nowhere in Barbados should there be corporal punishment.
Yes, Senator Blackman.
Mr. President, sir, point of order, I said very clearly that in a modern Barbados, that there should be no form of physical abuse.
I am getting
Thank you for the clarification.
In this modern Barbados, there will be no form of physical abuse. And I like the fact that we start with this legislation which says no corporal punishment in child care. Similarly to Senator Nurse and Senator Blackman, I'm the father of a girl child. And I keep threatening. In 8 years, I haven't done it yet, but I keep threatening the lash apocalypse. And whenever the lash apocalypse is delivered, Mr. President, it'll be severe. But so far, it's just been a threat to give these lashes. Now, while we may feel that way, we need to recognize that we were raised certainly in an educational system where blows were given to reinforce the point that was being made. So you may not know, but I had some of my education in Trinidad, Mr. President, and in this vocab, every morning, you used to have to sit, and when we were studying for common entrance, you had to do your vocab. So you start off with the word hate, first chap in the line, abhor, next mine line, detest, next mine line, dislike, next mine line, blows. So that is how we were taught. Now we are moving away from that as a society, recognizing that, hey, maybe this is not how we do it, but we need to be mindful that where we are coming from. Where we are coming from. I heard Senator Nichols at lunch, I would tell tales out of school talking about saying the multiplication tables. 2 by 2 is 4, and 3 by 3, and you go through the line, but as you start to get higher, fellas get nervous. It's a famous Lord Zen skit. Yes. A famous Lord Zen skit. Senator Boyce and then will post it on Twitter. Lord Zen, the fellas start to sweat when you get up there, and you get blows. But the point is, we come from a society where that is the norm. And that is how we were exposed. Now then we go and we say, there should be no corporal punishment. There are persons who will push back. Senator Rogers would say, spare the rod and you spoil the child. So we have to understand the messaging, as unique and as modern as it is, will not necessarily find itself being palatable for the wider society, because we know not from whence it comes. And it is modern, and it's UN, and it's highfalutin, and you're trying to bring other things in with the agenda. So be mindful of all this when you seek to do what I think is right. Actually, the same gentleman who doesn't want to be mentioned says that is lazy parenting. We beat those who we can. I think Senator Nichols said that at lunch too. You don't walk around the place beating someone bigger than you. I wouldn't go up to Senator Blackman and cuff him in his neck. Not because it's illegal, right? But he's also of a certain girth. But as we say, monkey know which tree to climb. So when we talk about this concept of blows and we talk about why we ought not to do it, understand why there's going to be pushback, but we all recognize that we need to move away from it. I think that's a given, sir. Now, sir, Section 63 speaks to unsupervised and unattended children. I think, again, this needs to fall within the category of what we tell people about this legislation, because it is a penalty with regard to children under 12 being unsupervised. Sir, we are well aware of households in all socioeconomic demographics where children are left with the older person being a child of 10. We see children walking on our roads going to school, and I am shocked at the age which they're walking by themselves. Is that not an unattended child? Walking on the road, is that not dangerous? So we have to be careful with the best of intent what can happen with this type of legislation unless it is adequately rolled out. Education is performed as to the cause and effect and the meaning and the penalties and guidance given to those who have to implement when it comes forward. Sir, no issues with Section 64, cruelty to children. It is wide, and of course the objective is to protect a child from abuse. At the end of the day, full support for this legislation. I've heard the commentary about society and where we are, but not that we should find any comfort in this, but this is the way of the world. The world is sometimes a dark place. So let's come together and try to be each other's keeper and recognize that when you see that child on the road in Barbados, it's not somebody else's child, you know, it's our child. Yes. It's the collective Barbadian, it is our child. So in commending this legislation, sir, just remember one thing. You see that list that talk about persons who have responsibility in case of immediate reporting? At the end of the day, all of us have that responsibility. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Kevin Boyce. Senator Nichols.
Mr. President, I'm grateful for the opportunity later in the day to make a small contribution to the bill under consideration before the Honorable Senate. Sir, one of the lasting impressions on me as a young lawyer was coming to the aid of a friend who was in despair because he was picking up his children, aged 3 and 5, from the school, nursery school and primary school, because the teachers were complaining that his children were in distress, and the mother had brought them to school and they were in obvious distress. It happens that the mother's husband had beat both the 3-year-old and 5-year-old with a belt to the extent that those lashes left marks and blood in the children, 3 and 5-year-old. And he was in despair because he was contemplating what he can do to this man. And I had no pretension to do or deal with family law matters. It is not my forte, it was never my calling. I didn't even do family law at the university. And had to come to grips with assisting a friend in need. And one of the things that grabbed my attention was the slow pace at which the system could work at the time, because the school, both the nursery school and the primary school, called him as a father rather than the mother, because the children were in the day-to-day care and custody and control of the mother and her husband. But the mother was actually powerless to deal with the discipline that this man was, whom she was married to, was instilling in these young children. They had to be beaten, because if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. And that is a lasting memory that I had. And I came to the conclusion then, sir, that the legislation that we had to protect children in this country was deficient. I've since then come into a situation where children had to be removed from a house where there was repeated sexual abuse by the father, who is a person of prominence in the society. And this is not the first occasion, this is not the first country where these allegations were made, and things of that sort. These are a couple of examples that I, who don't practice family law or get involved in these matters, have encountered in my, according to the Senator Boyce, I was say it loudly, in my 24 years at the bar. And I don't practice in this area. I remember, Chair, discussing with my wife the possibility of taking on a case on the instructions from lawyers from overseas, when my daughter said, who overheard, we weren't calling names or anything, that I know what you're talking about because the girl goes to my school. This happens every day in this country. Mr. President, I don't mean to detain the business of the Senate today, but I would find it difficult to remain silent if a debate of this nature were to pass and I were not to lend my contribution to the work that government has done to put this bill together. And I'm speaking a little bit more restrained than I normally would. Legislation doesn't excite me in the way to come out and speak to it, because what we are trying to deal with here in putting a regime, a modern, comprehensive, coherent regime for child protection in Barbados is really too long in coming. And one of the things that strikes me is that we have too many ancient, vintage, Victorian laws in a country that has celebrated 50 years of independence a long time ago. There is no justifiable excuse for us to be still having piecemeal approaches to dealing with social problems that are created in the country, particularly as it relates to children. We've had, from 2007, a lot of reports, the Child Protection Assessment, Child Protection in Barbados, and the need for national reporting protocols since 2007. In 2013, there was a review of the Child Care Board. In 2014, there was a review of the laws relating to children, women, and their families. And Senator Boyce made reference to the work of our child advocate, Faith Marshall Harris, and the tireless work she and her organization and her affiliations do on behalf of championing children. We've also had the white paper on laws related to children, women, and families in 2015, and various other reporting protocols from the international treaties to which Barbados is aligned to, requiring us to make these mandatory reporting situations. All of these assessments have, for the last 10 or so years, have indicated to us that our laws relating to the protection for children is deficient. The legal system is deficient. So that one of the things that I admire about the work of this government is that we are not shy to dismantle, break down, and rebuild the institutions in this country to make them fit for purpose and to make them coherent within the context of the world that we live in. This bill, the Child Protection Bill, does that. And I think my colleagues dealt with a lot of the misinformation circulating in other places that sought to give some sinister motivation behind the efforts of government in this regard. And I recall the admirable attempt by a young attorney at law and his colleagues in drafting the bill from scratch. And obviously in the context of a political opposition, the media gave a lot of attention to their concerns, but when pressed, the bill was drafted without a lot of, or the model that they had was drafted without any consultation with the agencies that interact with children, whether it be the government agencies or agencies from the fourth sector and so forth. What we have, Mr. President, is something that I believe that we can be proud of, and I think that the approach of the government by way of the Parliamentary Select Committee process to engage the parliamentary bodies, both the House and Senate, and also the members of the public, stakeholders, when it comes to major pieces of legislation, is a step in the right direction. It is new to Barbados, and I believe, Mr. President, that it is something that is essential because we get the opportunity to bring the best version of legislation to Parliament for final progression through its various readings. Mr. President, the notion of the best interest of the child is something that is widely understood within the context of international law and indeed in our own domestic legal framework. The existing mantra that you would hear is when there's a matter of the child involved, is what is in the best interest of the child becomes paramount. Now, I do agree that Senator Boyce's comment in terms of respect for the views of the child, but I would dare say that in legislation such as this, you would expect a court to give a broad interpretation towards like the views of the child and not to limit it to any specific or dictionary interpretation as to what the word views are. Given the importance and the contextual place of the international rights that are in the International Convention on the Rights of the Child, I would think that you cannot limit the interpretation of the views of the child to be as narrow as may be the suggestion. But I do accept that there is the scope for the limited interpretation, but I would hope that our courts will be staffed with the appropriate personnel to interpret these matters on a way that is consistent with international trends in terms of how these concepts have emerged in other cases in other jurisdictions, particularly and giving good consideration to the particular circumstances which come before the court. Chair, sir, Article 19 speaks of the Convention speaks to the right to protection from all forms of violence. This bill does go a certain way to make sure that in our institutional arrangements, children should be protected from all forms of violence. I would place on the record, Mr. Chair, Mr. President, that I don't support there's any legitimate, lawful, or even constitutional basis for corporal punishment. And I'm not advocating for there to be a flurry of applications before the court. But I would surmise that if it were challenged, that it would be hard-pressed for the state to convince a court that the administration of corporal punishment by the state, even in a school, might not survive any challenge to the right to be free from inhuman and degrading punishment based on the constitutional rights that we have. I don't support it, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President. And that is not because I didn't suffer from it. We all got a lot of lashes. I believe it's fair to say that my mother lashed me every day. And I don't think necessarily that I am the better or the worse for it, because it really made no difference to how we as boys operated. But I would tell you that we tried to avoid punishment from my father, who was a different kettle of fish altogether, because his was more ceremonial and more infrequent, but you really don't want to have that kind of interaction with a retired Navy officer. But, sir, my children have not necessarily, and thus far, given rise for that infliction. And I know several of my friends and associates who I grew up with who never had to go through corporal punishment. It is insane to justify inflicting harm on a child as a means of discipline. It is inconsistent. It is unreasonable. We do not beat adults when they err. And Senator Boyce quoted me correctly. We tend to beat the people in society who can't defend themselves. It is a legacy of do as I say or let's that comes from a not too distant past. I abhor the treatment that was meted out to us as boys and girls at schools, because I know it made no difference to your upbringing. And anybody who says that they only learn or behaved because they get licks, rationalize for me why they are behaving now. Rationalize for me why they are productive members of society. Because you were beaten? I cannot set that logic. And I applaud those parents who are more inventive in terms of the range of disciplinary measures. My grandmothers, both of them, I had the good fortune to live under their rule, never hit us. But their punishments were more severe than anything else, because when you wanted to go to play and run boat in either Bredinson or in Arthur Seat, and you felt that they had forgotten that you had not obeyed an instruction, can't leave your house. And if tomorrow you feel that you can do what Granny say and you go and wash down the pens or whatever, you count the sheep or do whatever you had to do, she still ain't forget. And you ain't safe for the whole week, not raising a voice. And I believe that in the village and in the communities that I came from, all of the grandmothers and persons of that vintage who exacted that type of discipline were more successful in raising the men and women who are the champions of society and the communities that I have come from. There is no need for the infliction of violence on a child, not only in government institutions, but at all. We can't tell parents what to do, but you could be like the husband of that lady who was powerless when he thought that beating a 3-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy with a belt to the extent that they had what they call the back well up and blood in his shirt, the girl couldn't sit down because he thought that that level and degree of force was a biblical injunction ordained by God. Spare the rod, spoil the child. There has to come a time when we need to protect those children from that kind of lunacy in this society. Because there are too many children who suffer from physical violence in the name of discipline. Because when the parents get upset, they try to enact discipline as a means of redress. That is not protection of children. And if I fall on the political sword of saying that I am not on the side of corporal punishment, so be it. But that's my view. Not to say that I agree with Senator Boyce's concern about the age at which criminal liability should arise. I don't condone foolishness. I don't condone that we should allow children to do as they like either. But at the same time, I don't believe that the answer could be any form of physical violence in order to get children to do what they want. Mr. President, having been told that you can't play for the school because you're rude to a teacher or you're making fun in class and you're not behaving well, man, you couldn't play cricket on the weekend for your school. And when you went to school, you know that's 2 weeks straight. Fellas come back on Monday and say this boy score runs and boy get wickets. You can't play because you're making fun in class and the teacher put you out the strips and then you end up name off the list. His master said, well, Gregory, sorry. Can do nothing about it. That meant more than licks. We have to accept that we have a problem in this society. We have to accept it. Now, how do we deal with deviant youth in the society? Do we create greater forms of punishment? That is one way of dealing with it. But I dare say that if we're going to protect our children, we need to also re-engage with our young people on the terms that they live in the world that they live in, and not try to, as the old people would say, force fit the methodologies of the past on the society of today. I can see my son on his device playing a game with people from all over the world, talking, people in different languages, and they're communicating. Imagine if we had taken that device to school in our times. Licks. We've come far, but have we come far enough? And I'm asking the country to re-engage on the notion of how do we deal with getting our young people engaged in a cooperative effort to build a good society. How? So, the government's responsibility in bringing this legislation to bear deals with a lot of the deficits in the existing legislation. It also highlights a number of the important principles as a starting place for us to deal with child protection. It also expands the grounds of intervention that were not possible under the Child Care Board Act. We had this omnibus offense of wandering, which was this designated category to place people in. And again, this Victorian legislation from the Victorian era, a girl whose father was convicted of a sexual offense could be found guilty of wandering. Under the law that was struck down by the court 2 years ago, last year, Section 14 of the Government Industrial Schools Reformatory Act, a girl whose father was convicted of a sexual offense could be charged for wandering and imprisoned for 5 years. That's how we protect children. I see the look of consternation of some of my colleagues, but check the legislation that was struck down by the courts. The Child Justice Bill comes to repeal that in its entirety. But the point I'm making is that we have decided as a government to deal with this issue head on. We will get criticism because there are opponents of the government who will use every opportunity to use misinformation to generate attention to their causes. And a lot of the criticism of the bill and the marching that they did, they too should apologize to the children of Barbados, because this bill does not contain anything dealing with gender alignment and all of that kind of nonsense and claptrap that was spewed out in opposition to the very thing that will modernize our way of dealing with protecting the children of our country. Mr. President, I know time is against us and there's another national event going on, but I will close with this. I am aware, Mr. President, that a large proportion of people in the country are on the dark web trafficking in child pornography. I heard some other senators say yes. It is a big thing in Barbados. Senator Rogers is saying, I know I have to report it, but there are authorities of the state who already are aware, who have told me that. And this legislation will enhance their ability to go after these people who are trafficking in child pornography. We have to protect our children. We have to protect the legacy and the future of the country. And the government will not renege on that responsibility. Mr. President, I will close and come back when we deal with the Child Justice Bill in greater detail, because I understand that the Senate wants to close down this debate we have been going from since this morning on it. And I promise I will stick to my allotted half hour on that next occasion. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Nichols. Stand if you want to speak. Senator Monroe Knight.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me thank all of the honorable senators that would have contributed to the debate today, through this morning and into this afternoon. It has been a discussion which suggests that there is full agreement on the importance of this bill, full agreement in relation to the intent of the bill to protect our children. I want to especially note that the Democratic Labour Party has also indicated that it is in agreement with the government on this bill as well. Mr. President, much has been said, so I will be very short in my wrap-up. Just to note 3 points. I think that the conversation perhaps can be revolved around 3 areas. One, there is clearly, as I would have indicated in my presentation as well, the need for a holistic frame with this legislation will have to operate in. The recognition that the legislation, yes, also it will depend on other kinds of architecture. There was some discussion around education and what needs to happen within education and the deficits. And again, identifying, Mr. President, that the government has announced, the Ministry of Education, the plan for education transformation, and the fact that under that program, the intent, as was discussed, is to revamp the school plans, to be able to address issues of allowing children to have an environment that is wholesome, that is safe, but that is nurturing. The issue of teacher training as well will be addressed. The issue of curriculum development addressed within the education transformation as well. I want to also address the issues of resourcing and how we will ensure that we are able to fully implement what the Child Protection Bill indicates, not only in relation to the establishment of the authority itself, but also as well how we make sure that we deliver on the promises. As was indicated by Senator Nurse, we know that the ministry is currently undergoing a level of restructuring, an amalgamation of all of the entities that fall under the Ministry of People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs. And that is about streamlining the resources, ensuring that it has proper trained staff to be appropriately placed in areas where they are most needed. The government has already made a commitment, as I indicated within the budget, to making sure that we can resource the center that is proposed, Mr. President. And so the government is demonstrating already within the context, one, of reform, and also as well putting the resources where it is needed in order to ensure, again, that we can deliver, Mr. President. I also as well want to note in particular, there was a question in relation to the administrative penalties and the extent to which this is adequately addressed. And I want to draw attention, Mr. President, to Section 6, Clause 60, 61, and 62, which provides in great detail how those administrative penalties are to be applied, including the the time frame for the administrative penalties, including the procedures for challenging an alleged administrative contravention, and as well how the state will seek to address the issues of debt to the state in relation to the administrative penalties as well. I want to thank Senator Boyce for his indication that the government needs to have an ongoing public education campaign in order to ensure that people fully understand their obligations under the Child Protection Bill, and to also indicate that that's something that the government plans to do in terms of its ongoing outreach and work with all of the relevant stakeholders, Mr. President, in this effort to make sure, again, that we can deliver. Finally, Mr. President, again, I want to join all of the honourable senators, as I would have done, but again to reiterate our thanks to all of those, including the members of the committee, including the minister and his staff, members and the board and the Board of Management of the Child Care Board, and importantly as well, to all of the honourable senators, as I said before, that would have contributed to this debate, demonstrating again the utmost importance of protecting our nation's children and making sure that we send a strong signal of its importance and our commitment. Mr. President, I beg that this bill now be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Earlier in the day, I had indicated that our Deputy President is away on business. Therefore, before we move the bill further, proceed with the election of an acting president. Senator Cummins. Acting Deputy President, sorry.
Mr. President, I beg to move the appointment of an acting deputy president in the person of Senator the Honourable Lindell Nurse.
The question is that Senator the Honourable Lindell Nurse be elected acting Deputy President for the remainder of today's sitting. Our standing order does not exactly describe such a person. It describes a Deputy President who is also acting, who performs the function of Chairman of the Committee. The question is that Senator the Honourable Lindell Nurse be elected as our acting Deputy President until, for the remainder of today's sitting. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Congratulations and thank you, Senator Nurse, for your ever willingness to serve. Senator Dr. Morrow-Knight.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Senate is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, may we take the bill in parts? Part 1, clauses 1 through 7.
Mr. Chair, I beg that clause 1, 2, part 1, 2, 7, stand part. Part 1, clauses 1 through 7, do now stand part.
The question is that part 1, clauses 1 to 7 stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 8 to 21.
Mr. Chair, I beg that part 2, clauses 8 to 21, do now stand part.
The question is that part 2, clauses 8 to 21 stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 22 to 31.
Mr. Chair, I beg that part 3, clauses 22 to 31, do now stand part.
The question is that part 3, clauses 22 to 31 stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4 is clauses 32 to 50.
Mr. Chair, I beg that part 4, clauses 32 to 50, do now stand part.
The question is that part 4, clauses 32 to 50 do now stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 51 to 59.
Mr. Chair, I beg that part 5, clauses 51 to 59, do now stand part.
The question is that part 5, clauses 51 to 59 do stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 60 to 62.
Mr. Chair, I beg that part 6, clauses 60 to 62, do now stand part.
The question is that part 6, clauses 60 to 62 do stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 63 to 66.
Mr. Chair, I beg that part 7, clauses 63 to 66, do now stand part.
The question is that part 7, clauses 63 to 66 do now stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 67 to 73.
Mr. Chair, I beg that part 8, clauses 67 to 73, do now stand part.
The question is that part 8, clauses 67 to 73 do now stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The first schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Hold on.
Report.
Right.
Mr. Chair, I do not beg that you now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I do not beg that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that the bill be read a third time. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Child Protection Act 2024.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Child Protection Act 2024. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Before I invite Senator Cummins to move the adjournment, I just wanted to express thanks to the two senators who were on the Joint Select Committee, Senator Dr. Cameron Rogers and Senator John King, for their contribution to moving this matter from where it was to the passing of this one of two bills. Thank you very much. I thank everyone for their contributions today. And I'm reminded that former Senator Chelston Bradford was also on the committee up to when he demitted office. I was going to make this announcement. I was going to revert to announcements, but I also want to record our thanks to former Senator Dr. Chelston Bradford, who today gifted us each with a package with his publication, Producing Food in Small Spaces, a Strategy to Improve Household Food Security in Barbados. Useful publication of 50 pages with lots of very practical, easy to absorb tips, things that we learned from our grandparents but may have forgotten along the way because of disuse. But this really requires for posterity simple things that we can each do to improve, including an economic input. There's a calculation of dollars that can be saved through employing some of the techniques there. So I want to thank Senator Dr. Bradford for putting his words into action. Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I also join my colleagues in expressing appreciation to all the honorable senators and members of the committee for their role in passing this seminal piece of legislation. This is what we came to this place to do, to change the lives of people. And so today, Mr. President, having come to the end of government business for today, I beg to move the adjournment of today's sitting of the Senate sine die, with the proviso that a notice may come out about the potential sitting of the Senate next Wednesday.
The question is that this Honorable, the Senate be now adjourned, sign it aye. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The next, the ayes have it. The sitting is adjourned, sign it aye.